Welcome to Literacy Matters. I'm your host, Dr. Cheryl Lundy Swift. I'm super excited to be here with my friend and colleague, Alison Ryan. Alison is a literacy specialist and teacher educator. Her roles have included classroom teacher, reading interventionist, reading specialist, and literacy coach, as well as director of curriculum and instruction. She has a master's degree in literacy leadership, ESL endorsement, and is trained in the Orton-Gillingham method. She is also series certified in structured literacy. Allison founded her company, Learning at the Primary Pond, in 2012 to help educators bridge the gap between literacy research and practical classroom strategies. Welcome to the show, Allison.
Thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate you having me.
It's great to have you. Allison, will you tell me about your literacy journey?
Nowadays, a lot of what I do, it's a mix of doing reading intervention for homeschooled kids, actually. I do professional development for schools, teachers, and I also run Learning at the Primary Pond, which is a literacy-focused company, and we provide professional development and curriculum resources to elementary teachers.
That's awesome. Well, I follow you on social media. I love everything that you do, all things literacy. And so lately, you've been doing a lot of work around small group instruction, which I think has been really great. So I wanted to dive a little bit deeper to really help our listeners understand all the benefits of small group learning. So what role do you think small group instruction really does play in a science-based reading instruction?
Yeah, great question. So I think that when all of this information about the science of reading started becoming more prevalent and teachers were learning, and a lot of people were wondering, like, okay, I've been doing small group instruction, and is that another practice that I need to get rid of as I'm upgrading, so to speak, to the science of reading? And the answer is no. But let me back up a little bit and talk about what the science of reading is. Of course, you know, Cheryl, the science of reading is this huge body of research. Different disciplines come into it, and it informs us how we should teach all aspects of literacy. It's not just phonics, it's not just in the primary grades, it's really this big body of research. And something we know from this research is that kids develop literacy skills at different rates. So of course, when you've got a classroom of second graders, for example, we know that not all of them are going to be at the same place in their reading development. You might have some kids that are still really working on the basics, the phonics skills, and some kids that are more fluent readers and comprehenders. And this is true of any grade, of course, not just second grade, but it's totally normal to have this, diverse range of kids. And so what small group instruction allows us to do is to provide targeted instruction on those science of reading skills at a level that's appropriate for each group of students.
Well, thanks for the reminder about all things science of reading. And specifically, I love that you called out that the science of reading research is not just for little kids. It's for reading for all children, right? And so thank you for reminding us of that. So, Allison, this weekend I had the pleasure of attending the Florida Literacy Conference, and it was really a really well done conference. Lots of learning happened, and I had a chance to listen to folks like Doug Fisher and Tim Shanahan and even Wiley Blevins. And I'm not sure which one of them said this, but so I can't accredit either one of them. But they were really, talking about how important small group learning is, but how we may have overdone it, how we've kind of left the whole group kind of instruction model. And I'd love for you to talk about how teachers can balance or should balance whole group and small group, and tell us what the benefits are of both of them.
Such a good topic to dive into. So with whole group, or I guess let me back up and think about it. The reason why we might have overdone the small group is because I think we as teachers, we see so vividly that this kid has this need and these group of kids need to work on this. And so we so clearly see kids' needs, and we're like, I'm going to use small group instruction. I'm going to differentiate and give them exactly what they need. And differentiation is great. Small group instruction is great. That's what we're here to talk about. But at the same time, whole group instruction can be very efficient. So let's say that you want to introduce the digraph SH to your kids, and most of them are ready for this. So it is so much more efficient to just teach that lesson once to all of the kids when they're sitting on the rug in front of you, rather than introduce digraph SH 4 or 5 times in your different small groups. And so, of course, that doesn't mean that you might be reading a decodable SH book with some of your groups, or providing some kids with a little bit more support or challenge with SH. But that initial instruction, when we have our whole group instruction dialed in, that can be so powerful. We can also differentiate within whole group instruction by varying the types of questions that we ask at, different levels.
Sure.
We can give kids different assignments, even when it's whole group, to work on things. And so that whole group instruction can really efficiently, because all the kids are getting instruction all at once, serve as like that core, that foundation. And then small group becomes an opportunity for us to give kids maybe that are a little behind or have some gaps in their knowledge to address that, right? Because they might not be ready for SH, and that's okay for them to have had that exposure, but maybe we need to go back and work with them on short vowels. Or maybe some kids are so advanced that they are ready to work on 2-syllable words with SH, and we can do that in small group. And so we have to start with a strong core just because it's most efficient, especially just with the realities of our classrooms. Typically there's 20 to 30 kids in a room and only one teacher, maybe an 8 if we're lucky. I think that's, whole group is a really effective way to meet their needs. And then small group can kind of go and add on, fill some gaps, challenge kids where they need to, and be a great complement.
I think the key word there is efficiency, right? Right.
Yes.
We know many teachers who are feeling overwhelmed with the number of students who need varying things. And I love the idea of making sure that everyone gets that same instruction and then leveraging those small groups to give students what they need. Love it, love it, love it. And again, those are students that are not just below level, but who also may need to
Yes.
stretch as well. That's
Absolutely.
really, really awesome. Now, when we think about, effective small group literacy lessons, what do you think are the key components?
This is a great question, and I have teachers asking me all the time, what should my small group instruction look like? Like, what exact activities should I be doing? And the interesting thing here is that what your small group lesson looks like depends entirely upon, number one, what's going on in the whole group, right? Like, if there's something that you don't have as much time for in whole group, maybe you're sneaking a little bit more of it in small group, and what the learner's needs are. Because if there are things that they are getting from their whole group instruction, then maybe that's not something that we need to include or prioritize in small group. The example I always use is phonemic awareness in a first grade classroom where, we're doing our phonemic awareness instruction whole group for efficiency. And then in small group, there are some groups that are getting what they need. They are on track. We see that from their assessments. They're getting those phonemic awareness skills already. They're getting what they need from whole group. So when it comes to small group, we don't have to try to cram in even more of that phonemic awareness instruction, for example, because we've got that strong whole group. So what you're actually doing in small groups, that's going to vary, but I have some general principles, things that I always try to think about when I'm planning small groups or coaching teachers. And the first thing there is clarity of focus and purpose. We know that we can't cover everything in a small group lesson, right? We have to identify what the most important skills are. And then, keep in mind, some days with whatever group you're working with, maybe you focus more on the decoding and the phonics. And then some days you focus more on the fluency and comprehension. Every day doesn't have to look exactly the same, but you do need to be clear on what skills you are working on and why you're working on them, right? So that brings me to my next point, which is that you always want your small groups to be based on data. Because we can't do it all in small groups, we want to keep careful track of, for example, how is, this group is doing with mastering silent E. So we can decide, well, if they've already got it, then we're not going to focus on silent E in small group. Maybe it's just a
Right?
little review.
Yeah.
And so assessments can easily be integrated into small group. The kids are right there. Have the kids do a warm-up activity, and then one kid reads a silent E word list to you, or before they transition, hold one kid back with you and have them read a list. And so whatever we're doing in small group, we have to know what we're doing and why we're doing it. We have to have a reason for wanting to differentiate that instruction and do this particular skill with this particular group of students. The other piece that we need to think about is explicit, clear instruction. In whole group, if we're doing a lot of modeling and think alouds and teacher talk there, we might sometimes have to introduce something new in small group, maybe do a little modeling, but we want it to be very concise. And that's always been an area of challenge for me, where I just want to talk until I feel like they get it. But we want to have thought about what we're going to say ahead of time so that we can say it in as few words as possible to create more time for the kids to actually be working and for them to be doing the work while they're in the small group. So pare down your language. And then also, when it comes to explicit instruction, one thing that is key is the gradual release of responsibility.
Mm.
And that is where we start out, we do our modeling, our think alouds, we provide kids plenty of support so that they can practice and be successful. But over time, we have to pull away that support bit by bit.
Yeah.
And what small group allows you to do is kid watch. And when they're right there in front of you, you can see, hey, maybe I don't need to be breaking down these multisyllabic words before they read, or maybe we don't need to stop halfway through the text to make sure that they understand. And so watching them in small group, it's a lot easier for you to start pulling away scaffolds to gradually get them toward practicing a skill independently. Because the gradual release and that type of instruction, it's big in the science of reading. And so, we have to incorporate that into our small group as well. And then the last three little things I want to say about planning your small groups is we want to have quick pacing. Your materials are ready. You're transitioning between activities quickly. Quick feedback from you. So small group is the perfect time for kids to practice skills, and you can give them immediate feedback, right? Because they're not off working on their own. And then the last thing I think about is how can I incorporate a quick review of previously taught skills? Because we know from the science of reading and really the science of learning in general is that overlearning is key to retention. So even after kids get a skill, I will do just a quick warm up in my small group to make sure that it's really cemented in their long-term memory, because I know that overlearning, practicing beyond just learning it, is going to lead to that.
Wow, those are all really great. Those components that you just mentioned, and what stands out for me, one, the efficiency piece again. But I think when we get into these small groups, to really be efficient with what you're saying, your economy of words, even, because we know that the person doing the reading, the person doing the talking, the person doing the writing is the person that's actually doing the learning. So we want to, and I love that idea of kid watching, right?
Yes.
That's a good point. That's really fantastic. So I got to tell you, Allison, a lot of people ask us, well, how long should a small group lesson be? How often should I do it? So, what is the duration and what's the frequency of a small group science-based literacy lesson?
Yes, this is a great question. And this is another one where it depends. I do have some specific recommendations or what I do, but first I'll say that it all depends on what your schedule is like as a whole and also how your kids are doing. If you've got a class of kids that really is doing quite well with the whole group instruction, then maybe, you need to do a little less small group instruction. And then the next year you have a class with really diverse needs, and maybe some kids even have trouble focusing in whole group instruction. So then you do a little more small group instruction. So these are all things that I think about, but generally I do recommend daily small group instruction if at all possible. I don't see every group every day because, again, they're getting their core skills in whole group, right? But I do try to see my group that's the lowest every day. The reason I don't try to cram in every group every day is because for many classrooms, unless you have a very small class size or a co-teacher, it's really quite hard to do that and actually get anything done in your small groups and make sure that the other kids are on track. So I don't see every group every day, but then in kindergarten, I'll usually spend 10 to 15 minutes per group. In first grade, around 15 minutes or so. And then in second grade and up, I would say between 15 and 20 minutes per group as the length of the text increases. But overall, it's about quality over quantity. Because if you're just rushing through your groups for the sake of making sure you see all the kids, then that's not going to be as effective as spending more focused, productive time, even when you see fewer groups.
Wow, quality over quantity, right? I
Yes.
I think it's important to note that we're teaching so that children can learn. We're not covering
Yes.
material, right? Very, very
Yes.
different. So when it comes to really put it using data to form our groupings, it makes me think about like in the before times back when I was in school that we had these groups of students who were like in the buzzards group or in the eagles group or in the robins group, and if you knew what you were in the buzzards group, you weren't flying as high, for example, as the eagles group.
No.
And then they would go in these groups and they would stay there forever, right? They would
Yeah.
never move out of these groups, in which can really be demotivating, especially because sometimes the child in that group was ready to move on to the next group.
Right.
How should teachers actually use data to really form effective and flexible small groups for reading instruction?
Yeah, so a couple of words that come to mind, which this is a great question. Fluidity. I always want my groups to be fluid. I might have, some certain groups of kids that were working together for a certain period of time, but every single Thursday I would plan my small groups and I would look at my notes. I would look at any data I have, and I'll talk more about what that data is in a second. And then I would decide, do I need to make any changes? So having that routine set up for yourself as you do your planning every week really helps. And then the other word that I think about when it comes to small group instruction, in addition to fluidity, is focus, right? And so, sometimes my small groups are focused on, okay, we are in this group, we're working on blends, and in this group, we're working on silent E, and in this group, we're working on vowel teams. But if my focus changes, then I need to be open to also changing who is in the group, right? In some classrooms, like I'm thinking about first grade, it does make sense. Okay, kids might be in the same group for a little while because they're working on this phonics skill, but I'm always, number one, having data, like they'll just, read a little word list, or I'll do a phonics inventory so that I know what phonics skills they really do need to focus on.
Yeah.
And then number two, and when I say phonics skills for kindergarten teachers, this could look like you're forming your small groups from the alphabet letters that kids do and do not know. For kids that are beyond foundational skills, maybe there's different types of multisyllabic words they can decode, or, can they read grade level text? What is their words per minute that they can read accurately? And what's their comprehension like? So different types of skills depending on what your focus is. But coming back to that word of focus, if you know very clearly, like, this is what I need to teach, and this is where kids need differentiation, versus just thinking like, I have these 5 groups and this is the way it is. If you're always coming back to your skills, then you're going to be more flexible, and you're going to say, hey, 5 of my kids, they're not really reading with a lot of expression because they're not attending to the punctuation marks. And so maybe they're not pausing at commas or changing their reading voice for a question mark. So even though these 5 kids aren't necessarily at the same, and I put quotes around this, reading level, or they don't know the same phonics skills, I can pull them together. I can pick a text that they can all decode, or I can read it to them, and we can work on this skill. So it just comes back to keeping my objectives in mind, carefully observing the kids, gathering data, and from there, your groups can kind of flow, and you can be flexible and just keep it focused on what you're trying to accomplish.
That's a really great tips. And what I heard you say is that, we need to listen to our students read.
Yes, we
We
do. And small group
gather.
is great for that.
That's right.
Yes,
That's how we use that information to inform when we need to change groups or switch things up. So I greatly
absolutely.
appreciate that. So, at the conference I was mentioning before, there's a lot of conversation around scaffolding. And, I live here in the Northeast in New Jersey. And whenever I visit New York City and see all these scaffolds around for buildings, and if it's been there for a long time, it becomes an eyesore, right? And you're
Yeah.
wondering, when are they taking that down? Well, I know in some of our classrooms, we've got scaffolding up that has not yet come down either, because we continue to over simplify things, to really over scaffold for students. So when we think about, these small groups, even though they're kind of skill based, um, we know that within a like skill based group, that there's also going to be some diverse students within that group. How can teachers really leverage small groups to differentiate instruction in those small groups without oversimplifying or even maybe overwhelming or over scaffolding for children?
Yes, so there's 2 pieces of this. I think number one, there's the fact that just because you have a group of kids, it doesn't mean that they're all exactly the same. They're going to have different needs. They're going to have different paces of reading sometime, or, different phonics skills, because often groups just don't come together perfectly in a real elementary classroom. And so one thing that I always keep in mind is just that I can ask questions at different levels. So I can ask some questions that are more appropriate for the kids that are, doing really well in this group. And I can ask some, more foundational questions for the kids that are still working on slightly less challenging skills. And I can specifically ask those questions to the kids that I want to answer them, right?
Yeah.
Another thing that I can do is just create proximity, where sometimes I will take, just on my small group table, I'll take one of those die cut, like a star or like some other shape, and I'll actually tape it down to the table so it's there permanently. And I might say, oh, guess what? You get to sit on the star today, or you get to sit over here today, on this side of me. And so I can provide more support to kids that need it by strategically placing them literally around the table.
Mm.
And then the other piece of this is the scaffolding that you mentioned. Like, how do we, provide enough support, but also not over support them? And in small groups, I tend to think about this in two main things. Number one is that I want to say less. I want to say as little as possible. Yes, I need to give directions. Yes, sometimes I need to model. But if I'm doing the talking, then number one, littles may zone out, but number two, they're not doing the work, right? I think you said this earlier, whoever's doing the talking is doing the work. So I want to say less, and I also want to get the kids to do more. So if I think like, oh, I've been helping them break apart multisyllabic words before we read, and I've been doing this for a little while, and I'm like, I don't really know if they're ready to do this on their own. Well, I'm actually going to let them try, because the thing is that if you just keep giving the same level of support to kids, whatever type of support that is, then you're never going to know if they can do it without that support. And so in small group, I can say, you know what, I'm going to take this away and I'm going to see how it goes, because you can always add it back.
Yeah.
But if you never take it away to begin with, you're not going to see how the kids do.
And I think it's such a great way to reflect, to find out maybe even what your biases are. If you
Yes.
continue to over scaffold, it just may make you think that maybe you don't think your students can do it, but they might be able to do more than you think, for
Kids
sure.
surprise me all the time. Yes.
Yeah, that's really important to do. Well, you've given us some really great tips, some great strategies to make sure that we have an efficient and effective small group learning. I'd love for you to leave our listeners with one thing that you would say to them to empower them about or how to use small group instruction.
If I could sum it all up, I would say to always prioritize quality over quantity. And this plays out in different ways. Number one, don't try to cram everything into small group. Yes, I know you want to differentiate and get in all those core skills, but ask yourself, in what areas do my students most need differentiation?
Yeah.
And then also, during which activities do my students most benefit from having my immediate supervision and feedback? And then it also plays into, how many times I'm seeing my groups. Even if I am only seeing 2 or 3 groups a day, but those are really quality groups, then that is so much better than trying to speed through 5 groups a day just for the goal of seeing all my kids. So always quality over quantity.
Quality over quantity. That's really great advice. Allison, it has been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing to support teachers all over the country. It's so great to have you on the show.